Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 16 of this NFL season, also known as the semifinals before the championship game next week, unless you play in one of those leagues that you need to speak to your commissioner if you do have a week 18 championship league. Before I dive into today's video, as a reminder that I did last week and I did in my waiver wire video last night, again, play the players that did get you to the fantasy playoffs. I'm a big believer in that, regardless of what the matchup says. If you believe that player did get you to the playoffs, leave them in your lineup. Even if these players do pop up in my sit sections tonight, still play those players regardless of what I say. Because as another reminder, even if you guys are still watching my videos and you're out of all your fantasy playoffs, keep in mind, my starts and sits, you can apply these to daily leagues if you want to keep on playing fantasy for the rest of the season. And you can also do what I personally do when you pay attention to the stats I go over. You can bet players overs and unders. I've hit some parlays doing that this season based on the information that I do give out in my start sits videos. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into it, starting at the quarterback position. As always, my top start of the week, I'm going to go with Justin Herbert against the Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed the most points per game against the quarterback position this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Dallas defense, all 4 quarterbacks in those games finished with at least 250 passing yards. They've also given up 8 passing touchdowns in those games. So I am looking for Herbert to probably finish between 230 to 250 passing yards and ideally 2 or 3 touchdowns this weekend. My other start, this could be a streaming option if you did lose a Patrick Mahomes. I did in one of my leagues, and I'm actually going to be streaming him this weekend. I'm hoping it pays off for me. With that being said, I also do like Bryce Young against the Buccaneers this weekend. When you look at the matchup, the Buccaneers have allowed the 4th most points per game against quarterbacks this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Tampa Bay defense, 3 of the quarterbacks they faced over the last 4 weeks have finished with at least 270 passing yards. They also given up 8 passing touchdowns. Bryce Young has been playing a lot better over the last month and a half, putting up those high productive days. So I'm looking for him to do that in a big game that's going to determine their playoff fate. So I think Young's going to come out and perform well for Carolina. My sits. Dak Prescott is my top sit of the week against that great Chargers defense. The Chargers have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against the quarterback position this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Chargers defense, there was only one quarterback that finished over 190 passing yards, and they've also only have given up 3 passing touchdowns in those 4 games. So it does feel like if you do play Dak, he's probably not going to get you a lot of yards through the air. So you're going to hope that he gets you at least 2 touchdowns to give you a somewhat of a floor performance if you end up leaving him in your lineups. My other sit, I'm going to go ahead and suggest sitting the rookie quarterback for New York, Jackson Dart, against that Vikings defense. The Vikings have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against quarterbacks this season. When you look at the last 4 games, there was actually only one quarterback that finished against them over 140 passing yards. They actually have not given up a passing touchdown in their last 5 games. Now, at some point, that is going to break. But at the end of the day, the fact that the Vikings have not given up a passing touchdown in their last 5 games, they're not giving up a lot of yards through the air, and you got a rookie quarterback with the interim head coach, that has a recipe for disaster for the New York offense. So I would be looking for other options than Dart in Week 16. Moving into the running back position, my top star of the week, actually sticking in that Vikings and Giants game, I like Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason against the Giants. Now, Aaron Jones is probably a low-end RB2 play. Jordan Mason is a sneaky flex play if you do have injuries. You don't have a lot of great options to play this week over Jordan Mason. But I also do think, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, these start sits are not just for seasonal long leagues. These start sits are also for daily leagues. So Jordan Mason could be a cheap option for you to insert into your daily lineups. But with that being said, I like Jones and Mason's matchup against this Giants defense. New York's defense has allowed the third most points per game against running backs this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Giants, 4 different running backs finished with at least 80 total yards in those games, and they have also given up 5 running back touchdowns. My other start, I'm going to go with the pair of running backs in Kansas City, Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt against the Titans. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, we already know he's done for. He tore his ACL. It's going to be Gardner Minshew who's going to be the quarterback, but even though Gardner, he's capable of running an offense. We've seen it done before in the league, and he's with Andy Reid. So I still see, not he won't be obviously on the level of a Patrick Mahomes, but what I think Andy Reid will do is he's probably going to lean more into the rushing attack and take the pressure off Minshew having to win this game. It also came out today that Rashee Rice is in concussion protocol, so they're going to be missing their top pass catcher. So that makes me even think more that this is going to be a heavy running attack from the Kansas City offense this weekend. Then on top of that, they just have a great matchup. They're going against a Tennessee defense that have allowed the 8th most points per game against running backs this season. Now, over their last 4 games, 3 different running backs finished over 80 total yards against them. Now, they've only given up 3 running back touchdowns in those 4 games. But like I mentioned, I just think I think both of these guys are going to get a lot of touches in this matchup now that Mahomes is out of the lineup. Moving into my sits, all 4 of these running backs are going to be playing in that awesome Thursday night matchup. And I do understand a couple of these running backs, maybe a Kenneth Walker, Kyren Williams, got you to the playoffs. And as I said at the beginning of today's video, if you truly do believe that player got you to the playoffs, put him in your lineup and try to see if he can overcome the matchup. But if you do have a better option to turn to, I would recommend doing that. And then as far as your daily leagues, if you play daily fantasy football, these are names I'm not looking to put into my daily lineups, especially if you put together like a Thursday night lineup. I'll be looking for more of the quarterback and the pass catchers in that game. With that being said, starting with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet against the Rams. Rams have allowed the fewest points per game against the running back position. When you look at the last 4 games, only 1 running back finished over 60 rushing yards against them, which I don't really like because Walker and Charbonnet split the touches, so it's going to be hard to guess which one of those might be the one that could maybe cross over 60 rushing yards. And they've also only given up 2 running back touchdowns in their last 4 games, so it does feel like if you want to take a chance on Walker or Charbonnet, it's going to be like a touchdown or bust game for the pair of them. And then on the opposite side in this matchup, Kyren Williams and Blake Corum against the Seahawks. Seahawks are tied for the 3rd fewest allowed points per game against running backs this season. Now, I will mention that there have been 2 running backs that at least finished over 50 rushing yards against their defense, but those running backs were Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, those guys are much more talented than Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. And then here's the biggest caveat why I don't like them is the Seahawks have not given up a running back touchdown, rushing or receiving, in their last 4 games. And keep in mind, in those 4 games, they've faced Bijan Robinson and Jonathan Taylor, and neither of those running backs got a touchdown against their defense. So unless, one of these guys can crack the end zone, it could be more than likely a floor performance from the Rams running backs tomorrow night. Moving into my starts and sits at the wide receiver position, my top star of the week, I like his quarterback, so I definitely like him. And it does feel like he's probably the most trustworthy pass catcher in the Los Angeles offense, the Chargers offense thus far. But I like Ladd McConkey against the Cowboys this weekend. The Cowboys have allowed the most points per game against the wide receiver position this season. When you look at their last 4 games, there have been 5 different wide receivers that finished over 85 receiving yards against them. And they've also given up 7 wide receiver touchdowns in those games. So I'm looking for Ladd to have like an 80 to 100 plus yard performance and get at least 1 touchdown this weekend. My other start I like DK Metcalf against the Lions. The Lions have allowed the 2nd most points per game against the wide receiver position. They are very banged up in their secondary, so I'm looking for Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers passing attack to take advantage of that in this outing. And then when you look at the last 4 games from the Detroit offense, 6 different wide receivers have finished with at least 80 receiving yards against them, and they have also given up 7 wide receiver touchdowns over their last 4 games. My top sit of the week, I don't like Dak this week, so I also don't like George Pickens against the Chargers. George has not been performing at a high level that we saw him at the middle of the season. It's kind of been, now I want to say mediocre, but kind of median over the last few weeks. But he also just has a tough matchup this weekend, going against a Chargers defense who have allowed the fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. Now, when you look at the last 4 games from the Chargers, only one wide receiver finished over 65 receiving yards. If there's going to be a Dallas wide receiver that finishes over 65 receiving yards, it's more than likely going to be CeeDee Lamb. And then another reason is they have only given up one wide receiver touchdown in their last 4 games. So it does feel like if you play Pickens, I understand he might have got you to the playoffs, but it might be a touchdown or bust game for him if you leave him in your lineups. The other sits for me, I would go with a pair of wide receivers for Jacksonville, Jacoby Myers and Brian Thomas Jr. against the Broncos. Broncos have allowed the second fewest points per game against the wide receiver position. Obviously, as I always say when I mention sitting wide receivers against the Broncos, they have Pat Surtain, the best cornerback in the league. He plays out on the boundary. Well, both these guys are boundary wide receivers. I don't think Patrick Surtain's going to follow like Myers or Thomas Jr. I think Surtain is just going to line up against both of them throughout the matchup, which is going to hinder their ability to be productive. And then when you look at the last 4 games from the Broncos defense, only one wide receiver finished over 65 receiving yards against them. It could be either of these guys, so I don't want to play the guessing game on that. And then they also have only given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns in the last 4 games. So you factor in best cornerback in the league is going to be on the field against these guys. It's a tough matchup on paper. I feel like it's a guessing game. Who might have the better outcome, better game between Myers and Thomas Jr. So yeah, you have better options than them. I would definitely recommend turning to them. Moving into the tight end position, my top star of the week, I still left him here even though Tua Tagovailoa got benched today. I think Quinn Ewers, it's going to be Darren Waller against the Bengals. Before I dive into the stats, even though Tua's been benched, I would still roll with Darren Waller with Quinn Ewers because I think everybody knows at this point young, especially rookie quarterbacks, love to throw it to their tight end. Darren Waller is their red zone threat, and they're going against a bad Bengals defense, so I see a lot of potential red zone opportunities where Waller can get you those touchdowns. But yeah, as far as the matchup, the Cincinnati defense have allowed the most points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, 5 different tight ends finished over 40 receiving yards against them. They've given up 15 15 tight end touchdowns this year. That is 5 more than the closest team. So yeah, even though Tua's on the bench now, I still would roll with Waller in my lineups. I think he's a great streaming option for people this week. Another streaming option for people to consider is going to be Dallas Goedert against the Commanders. The Commanders have allowed the 3rd most points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, 3 different tight ends finished with at least 45 receiving yards against them, and they've also given up 3 tight end touchdowns over their last 4 games as well. Moving into the sits, I don't like the rookie tight end for Cleveland this week, Harold Fannin Jr. against the Bills. Bills have allowed the fewest points per game against the tight end position this season. When you look at their last 4 games, there are only 2 tight ends that finished over 20 receiving yards against them. And the biggest reason why is because if he doesn't get you the yardage that you're seeking for, and it ends up being a touchdown or bust day for Fannin Jr., it's going to be very difficult because the Bills have only given up 2 tight end touchdowns for the entire season. So I do feel like you're shooting for him to have a yardage day because he's more than likely not going to find the end zone against Buffalo on Sunday. And then to wrap up the tight ends, my other sit is going to be Hunter Henry against the Ravens. Ravens are tied for the 4th fewest allowed points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, not a single tight end finished over 25 receiving yards against Baltimore. And then when you look at the entire season, they've only given up 3 tight end touchdowns for the entire year. So the fact that as of late, the last month, not one tight end finished over those 25 receiving yards, and they've only given up 3 tight end touchdowns, I'll be looking for other streaming options than Hunter Henry in Week 16. So yeah, that wraps up today's video. So as always, if you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please make sure you do hit that subscribe button. As always, you can follow me at Cody Talks NFL on X. That's where I'm the most active. But I also do have an Instagram with that handle and my TikTok as well. Just a little bit of a scheduling update for next week. So next week I'll be traveling to see my family for Christmas. So that will change the release of my videos. So since I won't be having to work my day job, you will be getting my waiver wire video and streamable defenses on Tuesday, sometime probably in the afternoon. Same goes for the next week's starts and sits. I'll be looking to get that out to you sometime in the afternoon. So that's why you do want to subscribe and follow me on all my social media platforms so you do know when that stuff is posted. But I'll talk to you guys next week. Wish you best of luck. Let's get to the championship game. Peace out.